Hey everyone, and welcome to Tracing Funds Through Bank Record Analysis. This is your host, Professor Colin May. Really excited to be here with you today to talk about just some really interesting things in the issues of bank record analysis, because really, let's face it, most of the financial investigations that we'll do in our career revolve around bank funds and banking records and being able to identify and analyze those. So put this presentation together really out of a necessity, because there are a lot of things, a lot of basics that can be really helpful for a new investigator or even a seasoned investigator to be able to remember and look at. So here we go. We'll just jump right in. So the first part is thinking about how money comes in. So if you think about your own personal finances, most of us earn income from a full-time or part-time job, and that money then comes in, usually to an account, and then we spend it on bills, right? So we make mortgage payments, we buy a car, have car insurance, we buy groceries, we go to restaurants, etc. And then it goes to somebody else, right, out of our account. Well, if you look at this chart, it basically says money can come in any number of different ways. Obviously, the most likely is earned income, but you can also inherit money. It can be given to you as a gift, and of course, it can be stolen. So somebody else's money, but you take it. Then it's moved into an account that either you own or you control. And then there are all kinds of other ways that you can, re-gift it, you can loan it, you can invest it, you can purchase assets with it, or you can hoard the cash and actually accumulate it in your house or in another account. But generally, these things come in and out of a financial institution and a financial account. And bank statements are absolutely the lifeblood of any investigation. Now, primarily, we'll be using and looking at some examples in criminal investigations, criminal cases, but they really can go in any different type of investigation, whether it's civil or criminal. But we'll primarily be dealing with some criminal cases here. It's just a little easier. If you don't have bank statements, it's going to be an uphill climb. As this slide shows, you can take bank statements and correlate them across tax returns and other tax information, financial statements, payment history, transactional documents, asset and sale, purchase agreements, property records, gambling records, all those other things, any third-party financial information. So they can be the prime evidence in most cases, but they can also be supporting evidence. So that's kind of the basics. We're going to kind of shift gears quickly just to give you a brief overview of financial institutions and banking in general, because it'll help understand what kind of records they keep and what kind of records you want to ask for. So this is a chart from a book published by McGraw-Hill, and this would be a community bank, a small, basically small regional bank. You have lending and commercial loan officers. You have a consumer loan division, maybe. You have the internal, accounting and operations, auditing, and then the movement of funds. But then you also have marketing, tellers, new account specialists, marketing and advertising and strategic planning kinds of folks. And then you may have a trust division. Again, this is very simplified, and it all depends on what bank it is, because understanding how a bank works is very helpful in your investigation. whether or not the bank is involved, or you're investigating an employee for embezzlement or anything like that. This is a chart from the same book on a much larger kind of national level bank. And you look at the top there, and the top is where not only the executives are, but also the administrative services. So your HR, your payroll, your due diligence, and anti-money laundering group probably sits there, legal department, things like that. So then you have funds management, investment, and portfolio groups, the money market accounts, capital markets, asset and liability management, planning, things of that nature. You probably have an international department to do all of the SWIFT and CHIPS and FedWire and all the wire routings, commercial credit, commercial real estate, corporate, credit cards, different loan groups, and then of course, obviously your operations, tellers, primarily ATMs probably are in there as well. And then you have kind of that other group, private banking, which is much more of a high net worth individuals, things like that. So when we talk about records, these are kind of some of the main items that I would want in an investigation. And we're going to kind of go through a lot of these, not every single one of them, but we're going to go through them in this presentation to kind of give you a flavor of what to ask for and how to do it. Using a standard subpoena is probably really important because, for example, if you subpoena a bank and they don't have the records readily available, they have to go research them. It'll take time to bring them back. You also may have issues with the missing items. So you want to go through and thoroughly make sure that what you asked for in the subpoena is comprehensive, but then what they provide matches what your requests are. Okay. You can obviously work with them for rolling production, which just simply means by the date required, at least some documents are provided to kind of get you started. And then, of course, the facts of the case will be very heavily dependent on what you ask for. And because, quite frankly, sometimes you don't know what you need, it's very helpful to ask for the usual things, and that's why having that standard subpoena is really, really helpful. So we break it down into kind of two types of transactions. First, you have your account transactions, which are the things we think of, writing checks, making deposits, things like that. But then you have these other kind of ancillary services or the non-account transactions. And these are things like loans, safe deposit boxes, and things of that nature. The objective is, whether it's an account transaction or a non-account transaction, to be able to follow the money trail from the beginning to all the way to the end. And that movement of funds is really important to understand, because when you're doing your investigation, that's what you have to put together. So whether it's finding assets for seizure and forfeiture, whether it's identifying specific transactions, using their financial information to help develop a profile and get an understanding of their financial position, or just to simply see what their pattern of activities and potential associates are, you're still following the money trail, and that's really what this is all about. So let's go ahead and start with an account opening, and this is really how things get started. So let me just stop and talk really quick. The example here is the signature card or request for account opening from a case in New Hampshire, and this is a case that I wrote an article about in Fraud Magazine, and it is essentially where the fire chief went and embezzled money he diverted it from the town. It was due to the town, but because his position was a town government position, but the fire department itself was a volunteer fire department. He had access to essentially both parts of it. So this is the account opening, and basically this is certifying that the officers of the volunteer fire department have the authority to open this account, and that's very important. So you want the application, you want the what's called KYC or CDD. KYC is know your customer, and CDD is customer due diligence. And these are things that are required by regulation to be able to be produced upon opening the account, so that the bank can run the necessary checks and also understand who they're dealing with. So there's a lot of information that can be obtained through this, just in this one piece of kind of, we'll call it layer, that we ask for. And it'll tell you who opened the account, when it was opened, who has access to it, but also provide you with other things like their license, the checks, potential pay stubs, or tax returns if they provided those for some reason, proof of residency, things like that. And of course, nowadays you can open an account online. It's so easy. So, you never know kind of what I've never opened an account online, so I don't know. But this is one, I believe, from Bank of America, or Citibank. And so you can see, it's a 4-step process. They basically have, tell us who you are, give us your signature, be able to prove who you are, and what you do, where your money's coming from, and then just give us the money. It's that easy. 10 minutes is what they claim. So, again, lots of great information. Most people, when you say bank records, think of the account statement, or what we'll call transaction records. This is usually that monthly statement that everybody gets, either in mail form or email form. And it is really key to putting it all together. You can tell what their status is financially. You can look at their capabilities and things like that. You can also identify the patterns of illegal or suspicious financial activity. And it can also lead to other types of witnesses or information, including other accounts. Maybe they weren't disclosed, and that's a big problem. Where they're getting their money from, who's actually funding their activities. And so, of course, if you're going to do an indirect income reconstruction, you'll want to do this, the sources and application of funds schedule. You will need these. But by themselves don't necessarily tell the whole story. You need the supporting documents, and that's the critical part. Sometimes people think, oh, I just have the bank statements, I'm good, and move along. But that's not true. And we'll get into some of those, but just don't forget, obtain the supporting documentation is absolutely critical to this. When you're looking at the bank statement, some red flags might jump out at you, and having an idea of what is normal financial activity for this person versus what is not normal or abnormal or suspicious. And these are just a small sample. It really varies case by case, but some generic examples can be things like unusually high monthly balances. When somebody says, I work at a fast food restaurant, you wouldn't expect $10,000 to be deposited. You would expect to see the, pretty routine payroll deposits from the, McDonald's or Wendy's or whatever it be, into the bank account. You wouldn't necessarily expect to see really high balances, necessarily. Unusually large deposits that are in whole round numbers, and then cash deposits that are kind of outside their normal salary range. So it's like, well, that doesn't make sense. Where did that come from? You can also tie things by virtue of timing. So you look at the dates or the times that things happened, deposits were made or withdrawals were made. And then obviously you want to look at the checks. We'll get into checks here in a little bit because those are really important. But again, a lot of it comes down to either amounts, people, time, or entities. Then the other thing, and this is a little bit more advanced, but if you have an inactive account, but you have somebody who's very involved and has some financial dealings, that could be a clue that they actually are using a different source of funds. So they may have another account. They may have accumulated that cash somewhere else along the line. So that's something to look into. So this is a check register, and I know very few people seem to write checks these days, and probably even fewer actually kept the record like they should, or they can. But this is just to show you what a check register actually looks like. And usually what it does is it names the check number, the date, the description of the transaction, who it was written to, what it was for, and then how much was paid in. And if you were really good about reconciling your account, you would include deposits in there and then be able to check the balance according to your bank statement when it came in. That's the way it was done in the old days. I don't know, a lot of people still do that, but this is a good piece of information, obviously, and it can be really important to your case. It's usually maintained by the subject or the person who actually has the checkbook, so that getting that is not necessarily going to be getting it from the bank itself, but you may want to match what's in this versus what's in the bank information. So again, you can get it through a search warrant, you can get it through the consent, things like that. Deposit slips and deposit tickets are really kind of important because you can see exactly what kind of amount was put in. So on the left here, you see the TD Bank. This is a $332.07 deposit into the account. Shows you the date and the time, probably the teller numbers in there, things like that. So you can really understand by asking the bank what these numbers mean beyond just the obvious. It's also really helpful. It's hard to see. Try and move this real quick. Whoops. That's not what I wanted to do. There we go. I'm going to try to move this. Here we go. So on the right, you will see, this is from a case in Tennessee that was investigated by the Comptroller's Office, Special Investigations Group. And basically what happened was, this is a another volunteer fire department, sadly. And basically what happened is that a lot of their operations were funded by the county government. So the government would give them funds. They would be able to pay, kind of essentially like expense reimbursements for call outs and things like that. So here you see at the very bottom is the source document from the county, from a check from their general fund for $61,375 to the Lawrence County Fire and Rescue. But this ties back into the deposit slips and deposit tickets, because if you follow the red line all the way up, you'll see that they included that check on $61,375. But then if you see that he actually, this is the treasurer, took out $3,000 in cash. So the actual deposit was only $58,375. And there you see, again, correspondence for the cash out ticket for $3,000. So what this shows was that if you only looked at the bank statement, you would only see the deposit of $58,375, and you would not necessarily tie that unless you actually had the check from the government, from the county government. So by having all three of these, you now are able to prove that the treasurer, Mr. Jeff, I think it was Hughes was his name, actually withdrew he stole it. That was money that should have been earmarked for deposit into the account, but he stole it by diverting it out of that. So that's just one example of the different things that can show from a deposit slip. So this is a check. We'll kind of get into those now too. So this is an interesting one because this is the treasurer of the Firemen's Relief Association. She's writing a check for $500 to herself. It could be very legitimate. There could be something a loan. It could be something, but it would definitely need to be well documented. And so anytime you have a check written to yourself or to the same person or to an insider, an officer director kind of thing, that does not have any explanation or documentation to back it up is definitely suspect. So you want to look at that. So let's actually walk through what information a check has, because this is a really great source of information and evidence. And if you can read a check correctly, it really makes a big difference. This is an actual check from the Enron case, and this was drawn on an investment account, but it's the same principle. It's essentially a bank. So obviously on the top left you have Jeffrey Skilling, his wife Susan, their driver's license numbers, so that can be included on there, and their address in Houston, Texas. And this is written to Jennifer, I believe it's Binder, for $10,000. I believe that's December 28th, 1997. But you will see here, so then you see that it's a Charles Schwab account, but it's actually held at PNC Bank. And that's important because you really want to be able to know exactly where this money came from or what account it was. You can tell at the bottom, right? You see that there's a check routing symbol, and that's 310, and that corresponds with the 310 that's on the upper right-hand side, right under the check number. Then you have the bank code, and then you have the account number. And so that is really helpful. Now, obviously, it's redacted here, but again, you can see this whole line that's in yellow is called the pre-qualifying number, and so it has all of the information before the check is actually written. It's all on there, okay? Obviously, it's the check number 277 you see up at the upper right, and then you have the post-qualifying number, and this is the exact amount of the check, so you can verify that it's 10,000. So again, that's kind of the front of the check to be able to see exactly where things are. Now the back of the check starts with, most people know where the restriction, or where the deposit or the endorsement is. This is a depositor endorsement, which is actually restricted, meaning Miss Binder signed it and wrote for deposit only into the account number of her bank. Now, sometimes there can be other restrictive endorsements. So, for example, in an insurance situation, if you get an insurance settlement, the insurance company may actually make the check out to you, the insured, but also to the company that's doing the work for you. For example, if it's a fire or flood. So it could be, John Smith and, Richardson Construction. So John Smith signs and writes for, deposit into Richardson Construction and then gives it to them, and then they can then deposit it into their account. Okay. So then there's a bank deposit stamp right below that. Now, sometimes with Check 21, now this is all automated, so it may actually be a lot cleaner, but it may not, depending on the banks. It also has the date that it was imaged, 3/16/98. And then other processing and proof numbers. And again, these are helpful because you'll want to go to somebody at the bank and say, hey, tell me what these mean. What do they correspond to, and how do they make sense? Okay. So that's how to read a check. Now, there are other kinds of checks, certainly. There are cashier's checks and certified checks. There are money orders and traveler's checks. Traveler's checks are definitely not as popular as they used to be, obviously, with credit cards now and the chips now. Going over to Europe is very, very easy. But they are still available, and you can still buy them. Unfortunately, they're also very, because of the way that they're kind of designed, they can unfortunately be easily stolen and then negotiated by the criminal. So again, these are all different things that you'll want to ask for and look at, and if somebody, your subject has actually done this, then that would be something you want to really spend some more time on. So another thing you'll want to ask for is what's called the monetary instrument log, and this is required to be kept under the federal banking regulations, and basically say if you're a bank and you sell these types of things, whether it's traveler's checks, money orders, certified checks, things like that, you need to keep records of who bought that and then produce it to the government upon sufficient cause. The monetary instrument log keeps a lot of really useful information, so it may be very, very helpful to use to identify specific issues or specific transactions involving the purchase of these things. Okay. Surveillance video, photos really can be very, very useful. They can show that the person was actually there when they may claim that they weren't, but they have a downside. They're really useful, but they may only be kept for a small, short period of time. So definitely something you want to look into, usually working with the security folks at the bank to get copies. Now, every once in a while, there's always something kind of strange that shows up unexpected in bank records. This was one of them as I was going through the records in this case, because I made a public records request of the prosecutor at the conclusion of the case, and they produced, ironically, all of the documents, including many of the bank statements that they received bank records. So as I was going through writing my article, I came across this really interesting one. And basically, for this fire chief, he was making a very significant amount of money for a small town public official, but he still apparently could not pay his taxes, which is always an interesting issue. So you just never know what you're going to come up with, and you want to be open and look at things. The last email or last bullet on that item is emails from bank employees or from the customer themselves, and that's why you always want to ask for correspondence, because they may bring it up. They may have attachments in there that you didn't know about. And the idea is just follow the leads wherever they go. You just never know what is going to pop up and how it goes. So one of the other interesting things that we think about is the idea of insufficient funds or bounced checks. And again, that can be a crime in and of itself and is frequently prosecuted at the state and local level. But for our purposes, if somebody is having a lot of bounced checks, then the question is, how did they come into that money? So, for example, if somebody has a lot of cash deposits or is able to buy a nice luxury car, but 6 months earlier was bouncing checks left and right, what happened? Why that quick turnaround so fast? So those are things that you really want to take a look at. Again, bounce checks in and of themselves over a good period of time, over high dollar, it can actually be a state crime in many instances as well. So put a chart together of all the bounce checks, and you can show how that pattern really develops. So that's good evidence as well. So let's kind of walk through some of the major parts of an account statement. We talked about it earlier, but I want to kind of go through some of the more details here. Every statement is going to be different. Every bank has a different format, but know that they often contain very, very similar information, just maybe in different places or in different formats. But here you can see who actually receives the statements, what PO box it is, or who actually has physical access to it. You see all the account numbers, including sub-accounts or related accounts. But you can also see at a very quick glance what the balance is, and that's really important. Here you see the account summary. It kind of breaks it down into beginning balance, deposit, checks, electronic payments or wire transfers, ACH, automated clearinghouse payments. So when you pay your bills online, that's usually an automated clearinghouse transaction. And then, of course, your ending balance. So then it shows that there were two deposits, one on March 8th, one on March 19th, for about $9,299 and then $8,467. So those are things where you say, okay, now I need to get the deposit slips and identify how those deposits were captured. Were they cash? Were they checks? Were they combination? This page has the daily account activity, shows your checks, the date, the number, and the amount. And I believe what she's doing here, the treasurer, those little check marks will indicate that she's basically reconciled that through the checkbook, so she knows if there are any outstanding checks. And then, of course, you have electronic payments. Now, this organization had a debit card available for. Obviously, if you're in an emergency situation, you need fast access to items. But this is really interesting because obviously, so here's a Delta Air purchase and a Wyndham hotel stay in Indianapolis. Now, part of this scheme was that the fire chief would go to trainings across the country, would go to conferences, things like that, and would have the fire department cover the cost of those, and then he would submit reimbursements. What's interesting is obviously this was a direct debit from the for the purchase of these things. So for him to then have gone back and tried to receive reimbursement after the fact, then he would, it created an internal control issue. So obviously there are a lot of different red flags potentially. So you want to take a look at those. Look at the checks, obviously. Look at the wire transfers and all kinds of things. It can also be really helpful to show foreign transactions. A lot of times we're looking for people who are moving stolen money across borders. So you can actually see, and I know it's kind of small on the screen, but basically there are a lot of Ukrainian purchases, ATM withdrawals, international purchase transaction fees, things like that. So when you start seeing things, that's an indication. Now, this is where Google and other search engines are really helpful, because you can actually pull up on the right hand side you see fmspay.com, and Nicosia, CY. Well, that actually corresponds to the country of Cyprus, and Cyprus has unfortunately, a sordid history of money laundering and tax haven and potential financial opaqueness. So, for a U.S. citizen to have an investment in Cyprus is definitely something you would want to look at. It may not be illegal, but it would definitely require a lot more investigation and due diligence. And then, of course, you have the daily balance summary, and this can be really helpful to show, again, money in, money out, where things stand at any given day. And so I just put this really, really quick Excel spreadsheet together to be able to just show, and it's a good visual, so it puts things into a little bit different perspective. And of course, we'll talk a little bit more about this, but when you do your analysis, you really want to concentrate on presenting the information in as many different formats as possible, because we learn in different ways. We see things in different ways, so that's a really important tip. So then we have kind of special transactions, things that require special handling, usually by a bank manager or a specialist. And again, these can be account transactions, they can be non-account transactions, but for the most part, they are either under the credit or the debit side. And you can see credits could be loan proceeds, wires in, special collections, different transfers, electronic deposits. And again, some of these are getting more and more frequently deemed a usual transaction as opposed to a special transaction. So, but things like check printing fees, those sometimes people don't buy checks anymore, so you may not see those. So non-account transactions, my favorite has to be safety deposit boxes, because there are so many areas. We could have a whole discussion on safety deposit boxes, but suffice it to say, those non-account transactions can be very important. CDs, securities, currency exchanges or transactions, those are really helpful. So our last kind of major category is loans and mortgages. You want to make sure you get the loan application, any supporting documentation that they provided, the payment schedule, how they were distributed, where they went basically, and then any kind of other information about that loan. And again, that can be a whole separate discussion about how loans are made and what they do to verify a lot of those things, but we'll save that for another day. So now that we got our universe of documents, we've verified that what we asked for has been all produced. The next phase is the analysis, and this is really where your job as an investigator or an analyst is critical, because this is where you make this is how you show your value and your worth to the investigation, because your job now becomes about putting it all together. What does it mean? And so one of the first things you want to do, we'll look at financial anomalies. Again, some of it will depend on what the case is, what the objective of the investigation is, what the facts are, but generally any kind of anomaly should be investigated, and you should look for patterns that are odd, and really deviations that stray off of the normal. So inconsistent with expected financial activity, indicators, those red flags we talked about earlier, anything that's out of focus, it just doesn't make sense. And then you'll do more leads, you'll do interviews, or find out more about whatever the issue is. But you really want to focus on what the facts say, and what information you can derive from that. Not just guessing or saying, well, I think this could be X. You want to say it's ABC, and kind of leave that speculative part out. So again, this is just the first step of many. So some of the things you want to do is probably a fairly routine kind of framework. That's what I kind of look at this as. You are going to look at the deposits. Can't really see that there. We'll move this. You look at deposits. You look at expenditures. You look at overdraft fees. You look at that daily account balance that I showed you earlier. We'll come back to Flexi in just a minute. All the kinds of different product types that this person or this account holder uses, because again, that'll, if you're a W-2 worker and you're getting payroll deposits every 2 weeks, and then all of a sudden it starts changing, what happened? Did they change employment? Did they did they get an inheritance? What happened? What was that triggering event? Obviously paying close attention to dates, people, other businesses, and locations or places that they frequent. Things, for example, like travel, is always really, really interesting. So let's get to Flexi here. So FLU, frequent, large, and unusual, is shorthand that was developed by the IRS in their training. I added QSE because I thought that it needed to be expanded a little bit more. So these are the 6 transaction areas that you really want to pay attention and hone into. So obviously frequent are those reoccurring events. Large are those large dollar deposits or withdrawals, or large in proportion to what this person's usual activity is. And then of course you have those unusual things that are odd or different for this person or the industry. But then you can actually kind of break that down even more. So questionable is really kind of oddities, curious things that seem very inappropriate for this person or this account holder. Suspicious are very blatant, very troubling, problematic. And then you have exotic transactions, luxury cars, very expensive vacations, frequent vacations, diamonds, jewels, things like that. So anything that has that kind of, largesse element to it is really just something to pay attention to. Again, and none of these may be problems or illegal per se. They just require some more investigation on your part. So putting together analytical products is, again, really important, something you can help to further your career. This is an example. I kind of modify this a little bit from Marilyn Peterson's bank record analysis summary from her books. It's really useful. It's helpful to be able to show at a very quick glance what the starting balance, the deposits, kind of where the major sources of income are coming from, who the major payees are, and then missing transactions or information, unusual transactions, patterns, and then recommendations for kind of more investigation or analysis. But again, this can be a lot of work, and depending on what you're going at, it may not be suitable for you. Again, going back to what I said earlier, it's really important to look at these and prepare information in a variety of different ways so that we can, things will come to us where we see it in one format, but we when you put it in another, it totally changes your perception of what the issue is. So I do text. So I do the summary. We'll actually have included one here in a few slides. Tables and charts are really critical. I'm going to show you some examples of those. Visual charts, and then transaction summaries. So these are kind of like holistic, where everything went, all tied up. And then, of course, you can do a single analysis area of like just deposits or just expenditures or just, what are they doing every Tuesday? Could be a way to do it. And then you could do check spreads. And again, we'll look at some examples here. And there are so many others. It really depends on what the case is and what you're looking to get out of it, or what the prosecutor needs, or the attorney. So let's look at this. This is a cash deposit summary chart, and I really like this because this shows a 4-year period where cash was deposited, first starting in 2012 into a single bank account. The next year, so the first year is like $35,000. Then the year after that is $46,000, and then the third year jumps dramatically. So it goes from almost $50,000 to over $215,000. So that is such a marked increase. That really shows, it's a good visual to be able to show you what happened. I mean, something happened between 2012 and 2013 that triggered this. So, really, really something to kind of pay a lot of attention to. Okay. This is another case from a public corruption case, and let me minimize this again here. You can kind of see that this includes a running balance. So you start at $326.36, and you get a wire fee or wire in of $567,000. So that just shows you how they had virtually nothing, pumped it up, and then went back, within basically less than a month, actually almost less than 15 days or so, to almost less than $1,000. So that money came in and went out. And essentially what was happening was that he was paying personal expenses. And as you can see, what I really like about this chart is that, so you have the amount, or you have the date, the check number, the transaction, the amount, and the balance. But then you also have a reference to the overt act of the conspiracy in the account, in the indictment. So that's a really unique thing to have, so that you can kind of tie each of those problematic transactions to the specific account. Again, you can really see how that works nicely. So I saw that and I was like, oh, I really like that. So this is a neat chart because you can actually see would be like a category of expenditures. So these are withdrawals, and then where did the money go? So spent money on an E-Trade account, on travel, on gas, on restaurants, car rentals, things like that. So you get to see all the different areas, and this is again a nice summary to be able to make it really easy to show where all the money actually went. So this is a neat case, and basically what happened is that this is a drug case. Ironically, police got information that the son of, we'll call her Sharon. Sharon's son was arrested for dealing drugs. And when they went to execute the search warrant at his house, they discovered a large amount of money. And Sharon, through the court process said, well, no, that's actually my money. And it made what's called a claim for it. Now, obviously the police did not believe her. And so in the course of their investigation, they subpoenaed bank records and for Sharon. And basically what they did was when they looked at it, they said, well, wait a minute. Based on what is coming into your account, there's no way that you could have this much amount of cash lying around and still have these major expenses. Okay, so you can see between 2004 and 2009, her payroll accounts and regular deposits were far outweighed by her personal expenditures. So she was really living in the red, if you will, and did not have enough money to basically support herself and her family. And so the implication is, if this money was really yours, you would actually spend it on things that you would need, and not just keep it in your son's room. So that's just a simple case. But again, refuting defenses is a huge part of the financial investigation that a lot of people don't think of. So here it is. This is exactly kind of the same thing in just a different format, and it shows you that all of her deposits, $867,000 between January 1st, 2004 and December 31st, 2009, were just so very, very close to her withdrawals of $862,000 that her money, that cash money, would not necessarily be, it defies logic, and legally they found that it was actually drug money. So I told you this is we talked about check spreads, and this is really important. So you can see this is actually the check number on the left, the payee, the amount, the date it cleared, and so you could really do a number of different things. You could run it in order. You could run it by amount. You could run it by date. If there were other payees, you could run it by payees. So this was a public corruption case out of Oregon that was investigated by a forensic accountant, who then they released the report publicly and showed that this individual had actually been writing city or county checks basically to himself. And yes, that is fraud. So when we talk about checks, charts and summaries, obviously you need to make sure you comply with the federal rules of evidence or procedure, or whatever your jurisdiction you're in. They should really be easy to understand and interpret. They shouldn't take a lot of guesswork to know what it is that the chart is saying. Be very, very careful about using what could be termed inflammatory words. Use very neutral words. Really just stick to the numbers. Include sources of data, and make sure the dates are included and correct. And they shouldn't be too cluttered. So the way I like to do it is I put it together and then I give it to somebody, and then I say, tell me what this says to you. And then if they say it and they get it right, and it's like, okay, well, yeah, that's exactly it. I know that is a good chart. If if I have to explain it to them, then I have problems. I need to go back and redo something or add something, or sometimes take it out. So um, it's a great way to kind of bounce ideas and get um, somebody who has no knowledge of the case to be able to look at it with a blank slate and a critical eye. Okay. So I kind of talked to you about using it, having a text summary, and this is a great example. This is from a criminal complaint, an arrest warrant. Um, so this guy was essentially the assistant athletic director at a college, and what he was doing was renting the gym out for basketball games to groups and such. Well, the fees should have gone into the college, but he actually set up an account where they deposited the funds. So again, he stole them. So you can see here, I kind of highlighted some of the key areas, who's signatory on the account, what the address was, and then it's a summary of between 2011 2016, there were deposits that were made to the account that appeared to be for the college, but then there are withdrawals that were things like checks to housekeeping, storage, birthdays, things that were much, much more personal in nature, not college related. Obviously, credit card payments, deposits to other accounts, payments for his personal mortgage. So those, again, this kind of summary is really, really helpful. Some may need to have more detail to them depending on what the facts are, but this was a clear, he set up this secondary account and basically embezzled the money that was really the college's. So, as we kind of start to wrap up, we talked about how important it is for us as investigators to provide that context and the value added to the investigation, because really without context, these are just numbers and they don't mean anything. They don't tell the story. Context provides the understanding of the situation by eliciting more in-depth information, connecting it to other points, other data, other verified information, and tells the story of what happened. So you can really make a compelling case that whatever happened happened. And of course, context is about perspective. It's about those meaning and being able to show patterns, relationships, and transactions. So I hope you enjoyed this segment on analyzing bank records. And if you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, have a great week, and thanks for joining me. The last slide here is a couple. If you're looking for further readings or more information, I highly recommend these. And if you need links to any of them, just let me know. All right. Well, thanks for watching and have a great day. Take care.